and a good thing too. The saltier water is, the denser it is, and dense water sinks. Without its extra burden of salt, the Atlantic currents would proceed up to the Arctic, warming the North Pole, but cooling Europe by about 15 degrees. The main agent of heat transfer on Earth is what is known as thermohaline circulation, which originates in slow, deep currents far below the surface, a process first detected by the scientist-adventurer Count von Rumford in 1797. What happens is that surface waters, as they get to the vicinity of Europe, grow dense and sink to great depths, and begin a slow trip back to the southern hemisphere. When they reach Antarctica, they're caught up in the Antarctic circumpolar current, where they are driven onward into the Pacific. The process is very slow. It can take 1,500 years for water to travel from the North Atlantic to the mid-Pacific, but the volumes of heat and water they move are very considerable, and the influence on the climate is enormous. Thermohaline circulation not only moves heat around, but also helps to stir up nutrients as the currents rise and fall, making greater volumes of the ocean habitable for fish and other marine creatures. Unfortunately, it appears the circulation may also be very sensitive to change. According to computer simulations, even a modest dilution of the ocean's salt content, from increased melting of the Greenland ice sheet, for instance, could disrupt the cycle disastrously. The seas do one other great favor for us. They soak up tremendous volumes of carbon and provide a means for it to be safely locked away. One of the oddities of our solar system is that the sun burns about 25% more brightly now than when the solar system was young. This should have resulted in a much warmer Earth. So what keeps the world stable and cool? Life does. Trillions upon trillions of tiny marine organisms that most of us have never heard of, foraminiferae and coccoliths and calcareous algae, capture atmospheric carbon in the form of carbon dioxide when it falls as rain and use it, in combination with other things, to make their tiny shells. By locking the carbon up in their shells, they keep it from being re-evaporated into the atmosphere, where it would build up dangerously as a greenhouse gas. Eventually, all the tiny foraminiferae and coccoliths and so on die and fall to the bottom of the sea, where they are compressed into limestone. It is remarkable when you behold an extraordinary natural feature like the White Cliffs of Dover in England, to reflect that it is made up of nothing but tiny, deceased marine organisms. Unfortunately, human beings have a careless predilection for disrupting this cycle by putting lots of extra carbon into the atmosphere, whether the foraminiferae are ready for it or not. You have only to look at the haze that hangs over our cities to see what a difference our contribution makes. We know from samples of very old ice that the natural level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is about 280 parts per million. Today it is over 360 parts per million, and by the end of the 21st century, it is forecast to rise to about 560 parts per million. So far, the Earth's oceans and forests, which also pack away a lot of carbon, have managed to save us from ourselves. But as Peter Cox of the British Meteorological Office puts it, there is a critical threshold where the natural biosphere stops buffering us from the effects of our emissions and actually starts to amplify them. The fear is that there would be a runaway increase in the Earth's warming. Unable to adapt, many trees and other plants would die, releasing their stores of carbon and adding to the problem. Such cycles have occasionally happened in the distant past, even without a human contribution. The good news is that it is almost certain that eventually the carbon cycle would reassert itself and return the Earth to a situation of stability and happiness. The last time this happened, it took a mere 60,000 years. Considering the age-old importance of the seas to us, it is striking how long it took the world to take a scientific interest in them. Until well into the 19th century, most of what was known about the oceans was based on what washed ashore or came up in fishing nets. In the 1830s, the British naturalist Edward Forbes surveyed ocean beds throughout the Atlantic and Mediterranean and declared that there was no life at all in the seas below 2,000 feet. It seemed a reasonable assumption. There was no light at that depth, so no plant life. So it came as something of a surprise when, in 1860, One of the first transatlantic telegraph cables was hauled up for repairs from more than 2 miles down, and it was found to be thickly encrusted with corals, clams, and other living detritus. The first really organized investigation of the seas didn't come until 1872, when a joint expedition between the British Museum, the Royal Society, and the British government set forth from Portsmouth on a former warship called HMS Challenger. For 3.5 years they sailed the world, sampling waters, netting fish, and hauling a dredge through sediments. They sailed across almost 70,000 nautical miles of sea, collected over 4,700 new species of marine organisms, and gave the world the name of a new scientific discipline, oceanography. Because the institutional world mostly ignored the seas, it fell to devoted, and very occasional, amateurs to tell us what was down there. Modern deepwater exploration begins with Charles William Beebe and Otis Barton in 1930. Barton designed the first bathysphere, from the Greek word for deep. It was a tiny and necessarily robust chamber made of cast iron 1.5 inches thick and with 2 small portholes containing quartz blocks 3 inches thick. It held 2 men, but only if they were prepared to become extremely unacquainted. The sphere had no maneuverability. It simply hung on the end of a long cable. But the nameless little bathysphere did the job it was intended to do. On the first dive in June 1930 in the Bahamas, Barton and Beebe set a world record by descending to 600 feet. By 1934, they had pushed the record to 3,028 feet, where it would stay until after the war. The one thing their descents didn't produce was a great deal of worthwhile science. Although they encountered many creatures that had not been seen before, neither of the intrepid aquanauts was a trained oceanographer, and that meant they often weren't able to describe their findings in the kind of detail that real scientists crave. After their record-breaking descent of 1934, Beebe lost interest in diving, but Barton persevered. In 1948, he increased the depth record by 50% with a dive to 4,500 feet. He was about to be comprehensively eclipsed by a father and son team from Switzerland, Auguste and Jacques Picard, who were designing a new type of boat called a bathyscaphe, meaning deep boat. Christened Trieste, after the Italian city in which it was built, the new device maneuvered independently. In 1958, they did a deal with the U.S. Navy, and in January 1960, Jacques Picard and Lieutenant Don Walsh of the U.S. Navy sank slowly to the bottom of the ocean's deepest canyon, the Mariana Trench, some 250 miles off Guam, and discovered, not incidentally, by Harry Hess with his fathometer during the Second World War. It took just under 4 hours to fall 35,820 feet, or almost 7 miles. Although the pressure at that depth was nearly 17,000 pounds per square inch, they disturbed a bottom-dwelling flatfish just as they touched down. They had no facilities for taking photographs, so there is no visual record of the event. After just 20 minutes at the world's deepest point, they returned to the surface. It was the only occasion in which human beings have gone so deep.
Unit ready. Ore miner under attack. Unit lost. Our base is under attack. Unit lost. Building. Unit lost. Unit ready.
Vehicle reporting.
Structure abandoned. Ore miner under attack. Unit lost. Our base is under attack. Unit ready. Unit lost. On hold. Unit promoted. Repairing. Unit lost. Ore miner under attack. Unit lost. Unit promoted. Our base is under attack. Unit lost. Our base is under attack.
Moving.
Unit lost.